Welcome back to another episode of Ask Your Pastors. Clay and I are here today talking about this question: how do you grieve well? Um, Clay, this seems like a particularly important uh, topic. The idea of grief, of loss, to talk about this time of year. Why is it that maybe if you could just share with us, why did we decide to address this topic this time of year?
Right. Well, uh, there's a lot of reasons that we experience grief uh, because grief involves a loss of some kind of loss. It can be a business loss. It can be uh, a financial loss. It can be the loss of a dream, something they've always counted on happening that isn't going to happen. Um, but it's important to talk about grief or to bring up the topic of grief during the holiday season because so many of our memories of holidays are tied to our families because we experience years of these holidays in our family unit and then with close friends over time and so as we approach the season with the noises and the decorations and the smells and it brings to the surface things that maybe we've um, tried to keep at arm's length and suddenly by by association we are feeling things that we haven't felt for a while or we're trying not very hard not to feel. And so I think you were saying, Donnie, a minute ago when we were talking that one of the worst things about grief is the sensation um, that individually we're absolutely alone in it, that no one else really understands, that no one else gets to feel the way that we feel, and there's no solution. There's no how are we gonna, nothing's gonna change.
Right.
Um, and so what the reason we're talking about this is really twofold. One, to help give ourselves permission to grieve, to talk about the good part of grief, and uh, and secondly, to be gentle and patient with people
Mm.
who are in the process and who need to. What would be really helpful to them if they could share that grief
Yeah.
and not feel like they're ruining the party
Yeah.
because everybody's so happy, but it's really
Yeah.
hard for them to be happy.
Yeah.
And we can give other people a kind of an on ramp so that they don't have to isolate, but they can be part of whatever's happening this
Yeah.
particular year.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, because the holidays are so tied to family, the other side to that is people that we've lost, people that have died that that suddenly are no longer a part of the holidays with us. I mean, that just raises another level of grief as well, going through a holiday season without a parent or a spouse or a child or someone close to you. That there's that aspect of grieving, and those, I mean, those emotions just run high during a time like this. So I love, maybe we could talk about this a little bit, Clay. um, you use some phrases even as you were talking about that, like giving yourself permission to grieve, or you talked about a gentleness, being gentle, being kind. um, I think there's a need to be gentle and kind with ourselves in our grief, to give ourselves permission to grieve. Um, let's talk about that idea. Why do we sometimes feel like we can't grieve, or what are some things uh, that keep us from grieving well, from entering into our grief in a way that brings healing?
Yeah, well then our next discussion, we're going to have two discussions on this, and our next one's going to be on how we can help others grieve. But it's also one of the reasons we don't want to grieve because we don't want to bring other people down.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to stay away from that.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't want to be alone, but to be with people mean we have to we have to put on a happy face on the outside, and that's really difficult.
Right.
So there's that where we just feel like the expectation is upon us to um, yeah, to be happy all the time. I think
Yeah.
Stephen Montgomery Smith talks about happy clappy Christians because we're always living victoriously, which means
Yeah.
equals in some people's mind.
Yeah.
We never feel
Right.
pain, which is just not the truth.
Yeah. I think
Um,
there's a sometimes I think we can have this. I don't know if you call it a hyper spirituality. I mean, we just as followers of Jesus, we want to honor the Lord. We want to be full of faith. And
mhm,
sometimes in that, I think when we're experiencing grief and loss, we can almost have this idea of, oh, I've got to be somehow above this.
mm,
So it's things like, well, the Lord is good. Yeah, this is hard, but God is good. I know He's got good things in this for me. I know we've got those truths that, yes, they're true, but we use them as a way to not let ourselves be honest about the pain we're feeling. And I think that can God gives a this is where the Psalms can be really helpful, right? I mean, the Psalms of lament, which are the majority of the Psalms, they're about getting honest with the Lord. I mean, people expressing, God, where are you? It feels like you've abandoned me.
mm,
Or, God, how long are you going to forget me? Or,
mm.
I don't see any light in the midst of this darkness. There's just such an honesty. And I think sometimes our Christianity, um, we almost think that it doesn't allow us that honesty when in fact God invites us into a real honesty, into entering into the grief, not putting on a happy face in some ways. And so I love, even as I've gone through little griefs, even because I wouldn't put my griefs in a category of. I mean, I haven't experienced some of the big griefs, but some people do, and yet I think our little griefs are very real too. Even giving ourselves permission to grieve some of the smaller things, not to have the sense of, well, but there are people in worse situations, so no, giving yourself permission to grieve the little things and
Mhm.
using the Psalms to do that can be really helpful. They give us language to express our hearts to God. Sometimes in grief, you don't have any words. You don't know how to pray. You don't want to pray. And the Psalms can lead us when we have no words, when we can't even put two sentences together. The Psalms can help us express our hearts to the Lord. They can give us language. They can give us permission to feel what we're feeling. There's just a richness, I think, in the Psalms for people who are grieving, to do that, to help us get past that spirituality that somehow we think excludes the hard, difficult
Right.
things.
Yeah, there's something we do where we really try to numb, and I think I think if we looked at it philosophically, it would be like, if I don't feel this, then it's not happening.
Mm,
Almost, so it's like I don't want to go into it. And
yeah,
it's not. I mean, as in a Christian culture, that can happen, but
yeah,
also in our culture in general. I remember when President Kennedy died. Uh, Mrs. Kennedy got such high praise for how stoic she was, and
mm,
just how she bore up under the grief that she was going through. So it becomes like the stiff upper lip. I just don't want to break down under this.
yeah,
But um, it's really there. I mean, it's the sadness and the pain is there, and to it, to try to ignore it uh, isn't really healthy for us,
yeah,
and not really helpful in the end.
yeah. The thinking in terms of just
And I just want to
yeah,
add something.
yeah, yeah, do that.
In the Gospels account of the resurrection, um, I've been really struck by Thomas. Who said he said he when when the other disciples tried to tell him that they'd seen the Lord, and he says, I won't believe unless I can stick my hands in his wounds, if I
Yeah.
can heal him. That's the only way I'm going to believe. And he's gone down in history as doubting Thomas. But I think he also is. I mean, you think, why would he be like that? And I think that it's because his grief was so profound.
Mm-hmm.
His pain was so great. It was like, I'm not getting on that horse again unless I'm absolutely sure it's safe to do it. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to trust other people's stories.
Yeah.
So I think he's an example of someone who, in the scriptures, really experienced the depth
Yeah.
of his pain.
Yeah. And it's good to do that as part of the healing process. You were even in the conversation we had just before this, you were talking about a proverb. You remember the proverb you were?
All right, because the proverb says, it's better to go to a house of mourning than it is to go to a party house, because the wise are in the house of mourning, but fools are in the house of mirth.
Yeah.
Uh,
And it says
and
a
it's a
sad heart brings healing, right? Doesn't it?
right. So I think it's the way we let go of things and we're able to move on. And so it's a bit like, well, actually, somebody's used this illustration in terms of forgiveness or unforgiveness. It's like when somebody has stabbed you, and you're actually sort of grab the knife, to stop it from going any deeper. Which is would be a natural response. But you're so intense on clutching that knife, you can't let it go. You can't let it drop. You can't forgive. And I think the same thing, we're so intent on not feeling something or not stopping the hurt that we don't realize that if we will allow ourselves to grieve, um, we open our hearts up for a new adventure, for
Yeah.
love. I mean, there are people who have gone through breakups and relationships that have been so tearing for them that the thought comes to them, I'm never going to love anybody again. I'm never going to take that risk because this is way too painful. And of course, depending on when that happens in your life, there could be a lot of life yet to yet yet to live, and you're going to live it alone because you're not willing to take the risk of letting somebody else in. And just because one person broke your heart, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to break your heart.
Yeah.
And so, in order to be able to just see the present, to see the joy in the present, we have to allow ourselves to grieve the end of the past,
Yeah.
and not just kind of freeze it or in sort
Yeah.
of some inanimate state.
Yeah. You told me that you've started telling people that when you're in part of the funeral, and you tell the family something, and even your experience this weekend in going to Walmart, how that kind of ties in. Could you share that little bit of what you've started telling families, and maybe your own just kind of experience of that?
Right. Um, so the grieving process is not all emotional. That's the element that we identify. I'm crying. I feel really sad. Um, but depending upon how foundational, this is particularly speaking in terms of death of someone we love, depending upon how foundational that person is to you, um, there's just a like it's it. I make the metaphor. It's like your soul or your brain or your mind has to recategorize a lot of information. You have to go through this emotional sorting process, and it's the experience of it is very much like what we experience on our computers, and when the main program is updating, or when there's some major scan going on, and what you're trying to do on the front screen, totally the cursor's getting stuck, the key is that kind of thing, right? So, so this process of grieving can take months and months. A lot of people say a year. I think a year is good. It can go beyond a year, but you find, or what I have found, is that thing that would normally be not an issue for me or easy to do become very difficult to do, like making a decision on what can of soup to buy, or what brand of bread, or what brand of dish detergent. It's like
Yeah.
I'm overwhelmed by all stimulus because I don't have enough capacity to take it all in. So what I said to Donnie earlier was I was at Walmart, and I just suddenly felt exhausted, and I went, oh, this is because I'm in the loss of someone who I love, um, and and so I had to tell myself, hey, it's okay. So it's okay, and what I need to do is go home and rest. It's
Yeah.
not like beat yourself up and just get this thing done,
Yeah.
because that's just gonna defeat the purpose. So I think that's why culturally we tell people not to make major decisions in a year, because your whole self is not available to make that decision.
Yeah.
You may have some of your brain available, but some of it's busy
Right.
making sense out of life without somebody that's been very important to you.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Clay, for sharing the thoughts that you shared with us today. It's some good things. We'll come back for part 2. How can we help others who grieve? So thank you guys for tuning in, watching this episode. You can always email us with feedback or questions you'd like to hear us address in future episodes at askyourpastors@christianfellowship.com. We'll see you next time.